Happy coding.
Hey there, and welcome to our next video in our series of Intro to Web Dev. As always, I am Kevin, and it's good to see you. I've been rapid fire doing these videos before I have to jump on a plane, so it feels a little hectic to me, but hopefully you are taking the time to work through these in your own time. So where are we? What are we doing? We are learning about JavaScript, and so far you've learned about actually adding JavaScript to your page, calling it, calling functions. You learned about variables and storing sort of values in variables, and finally you declared your own functions and then called them from event attributes in your HTML. So that's already a lot, but we're getting so close to putting it all together and actually making this into something that is very useful, and like I don't know, is the foundational building block of dynamic web pages. So that's what we're going to cover in this video. So here we are going to learn about actually making the page interactive and not relying so heavily on pop-up dialogues and alert boxes and stuff. I am just over here in my glitch editor as my place to work, and I have some HTML. I've got an h1, a p tag, and a button. And then when the button is clicked, I call the say hello function, and I define that over in script.js. Say hello prompts the user for their name using that pop-up box. It creates a new variable from the answer to that, and then it prints it to the console and then finally shows it in an alert box. So you've seen this a million times now, so by now you can probably guess at what happens. But if I hit refresh and I click say hello, I can type in Kevin, and then sure enough, here is hello Kevin, here is hello Kevin. So this works for, if all you need to do is show an alert box, or if all you want to do is ask the user a simple question and have them enter it, it can be okay. But for, most real websites or web apps, you generally don't want to show a bunch of pop-ups. People tend to hate them. Some people just block them entirely. So instead, what you want to do is actually have the content of your page allow for input and showing output. So to do that, I want to do a couple of things. So first, let's go back to CSS for a second. So remember that I can sort of identify my HTML elements in a couple of different ways. So if I go to my index.html, I can have the class attribute. You've probably seen that. And I can say I don't know, this is instructions. And I can add, some CSS that uses that class. So I'm going to use the dot, what do I call it, instructions class selector, and some curly braces, and then some white space. And in here, I can give it some style rules or some style properties. So I don't know, I'll say text decoration, I think it is, underline, maybe. I think that's right. We're going to find out. And if I refresh over here, and okay, there you see that it is now indeed underlined. It's not a link actually, because I didn't make it a link. I just made it underlined, which is maybe not a great idea. But I can style it using that selector. The other selector that I want to point out is the ID selector. I sort of mentioned that this, doesn't really make sense with what we were doing before. You can just use a class, right? But ID selectors are about to be really, really useful. So I'm going to sort of, review them. So if I have an ID here and I call this, I don't know, page title. I'm debating whether I want a dash in there. Yeah, let's put a dash. So I have an ID page title, and I can then select that over here. So if I have a hash symbol page title, and then some curly braces, and then in here I can, change, let's say I can change it to color red. And if I refresh, yep, my my h1 tag is red because I have given it an ID of page title And then in my CSS, I have selected that ID and then given it a color of red. So just remember that you can give elements like classes and IDs, and you can like select those elements in CSS. So store that like in the back of your mind right now. So what I want to do is modify my code so that instead of showing an alert box, I actually show like an input text field like in my page itself. And then instead of showing my second alert box, I show an output in my page. So I'm kind of just debating which one I want to do first. Let's do the output first. So right now, what do? I say alert my message. I want to basically get rid of this line, and instead I want to output this to the page. And we've already seen that document.write like doesn't really work. So if I do document.write my message, it will do something. So if I refresh and then I click my button and then I type my name, it replaces the entire content of the page with my message, whatever argument I pass in or parameter I pass in. That's probably not what you want. And so instead, I want to add my output to my page without clearing out the other stuff that's already in my page. So to do that, I'm going to first go to my HTML page. And I'm going to create, I don't know, this can be anything I want. This can be any element I want. So maybe just for funsies, I'll make it an H1, and I'm going to give it an ID. So I'm going to say ID equals, and again, I can choose any value in here. I'm going to call it output. And I'm not going to give it any content at first, or, maybe I will, like, I'll say like loading ... And by default, this is just HTML. I haven't really done anything JavaScript-y yet. I haven't used that anywhere. So if I hit refresh, I see loading up here. And, I haven't actually done anything with it. But now that I have this element that has an ID, I can combine all of the things that you have previously learned about in the last 4 or 5 videos, and I can get a reference to this element, and then I can call functions and set variables to change the content of this element. So I'm going to go do that. So in my script.js file, after I get my message, I am going to create a new variable. I'm going to call it like let, I don't know, like output element. And I'm going to set it equal to the value that is returned when I call the function document.getElement by ID. And then I'm going to have a parentheses. And then inside of the parentheses, I'm going to give it the ID that I used, which was output. So notice I don't have the hash symbol here. It's just output here. And then I'm going to have a semicolon. So I now have a reference to the element that's in my page, in my HTML. I have a reference to that in my JavaScript, which means I can do a bunch of stuff with it. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say output element dot inner text equals my message, and I'm going to get rid of this document.write. So what I'm doing with these 2 lines of code, maybe I'll add some white space just to make it a little more readable, is I'm creating a variable. I'm setting that variable equal to this whole thing, which calls a function document.getElementById, which is a built-in function in JavaScript. I am asking the browser to give me the element that has the ID of output. And then now that I have that element in my JavaScript, I am going to set its inner text variable equal to my message, which is the thing I created above using the concepts that we talked about in previous videos. So if I refresh over here, some of my CSS is getting a little goofy, but the point is that when I click this say hello button, I am still showing an alert box. I haven't gotten rid of that part yet, but I'm going to enter in, I don't know, Oscar the Grouch, and we hit OK. And now the actual content of the page changes instead of, showing another alert or, overwriting the entire contents of the page. It does still print out over here as well in console.log, but I'm getting to the point where maybe I don't care so much about what's in the console, other than, looking for errors and stuff. But this is getting me pretty close, right? I now have my output in my page itself. So if I refresh and try it again, the next thing I want to get rid of is this alert box. So rather than asking the user for their name, like in this kind of clunky old school pop-up box, I want to have maybe like a text field or something. So let me just hit cancel and go here. So to think about adding that, I know I needed to add a couple of things. So first I need to modify my HTML to like have an input element, and then I need to add stuff to my script.js file to like interact with that input element. So if I don't know off the top of my head like how to create an input element, this is getting back to HTML tags. So I can type in, I don't know, like HTML user input text, something like that. And yeah, sure, there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but I'll click this one, and the input element is the most important form element. It looks like I have a bunch of different ways I can do it. And you can read through this, but I will maybe short circuit it a little bit and say that the one we want right now is text. I think text is actually the default value, so you can just get away with just input. So I'm going to use this element in my HTML. All right, so getting back to my HTML, let's see. Instead of all this, maybe I will add some white space, and I'm going to add an input element. So I'm kind of thinking ahead, like, oh, what do I want it to look like? But that's CSS stuff. I'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I'm going to use the input tag here. And I could specify type equals text, but I think that's the default. Maybe I will anyway. Type equals text. So this is an attribute. I'm giving it more information about like, it's not the actual content. It's like information about the tag itself. And importantly, I want to give it an ID. So I'm going to give it an ID of, I don't know, name-input maybe. And this is one of those weird like self-closing tags. So I actually don't need the like closing tag for an input. So you can just have the opening tag by itself. And let's just see what that looks like and see if I want to change anything. See how extra I want to get. Yeah, so I am getting annoyed with this red stuff, so I'm going to get rid of some of this. I'm going to get rid of this CSS, and I'm going to get rid of this CSS. All right, let's just refresh. That doesn't really matter, but all right, I've got hello HTML. Maybe I'll say like, maybe I'll change this to instructions, right? So I'll say like p tag, enter your name, and then an input, and then a p tag, click here, and then loading. Cool, so I've got enter your name, an input, and then click here, and then say hello. So I haven't actually changed my JavaScript, so this this input doesn't actually do anything yet. So if I click say hello, I still show my alert box. So I've only touched my HTML so far. So this is still, what I had before. But now I have an input element with an ID of name input, name-input, which means I can go to my JavaScript and I can get a reference to that element, to that input element, and then write JavaScript code that like messes with it, that gets the value from it. So instead of some of this, I'm going to change this in a second, but I'm going to go up here. I am going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it like let, I don't know, input element. I'm not super creative with these variable names. I'm going to set it equal to the value that I get when I call document.get element by ID. And notice that like, the way this is spelled and capitalized, it's lowercase g, capital E, capital B, capital I, lowercase d. Like all of that is, important. If you get any of that wrong, it won't work because, your assistant here is not very smart. And then I'm going to give it my ID, which I've already forgotten. I think I called it like name-input. Let's double check. I always forget. Name-input. So I'm matching what I have in my script.js file to what I have in my index.html file. So now I have let input element equals document.get element by ID. So I have an input element variable which like points to or references or contains the element in my page, which means I can mess with it. And if you didn't know ahead of time what kinds of things you could do, you could, I don't know, go to a search engine, type in JavaScript input element, variables, or functions, and yeah, lots of results here. But because I am here, I will short circuit it and say that what we are looking for right now is the dot value variable. So let's see. So here where I say let username equals prompt, I'm going to get rid of this. And instead of setting it equal to like prompt, which like shows that pop-up box, I'm going to set it equal to input element. I gotta spell it right. Input element dot value. So now I have, a few lines of code. I get a reference to my input element, which is the HTML element in my page with this ID, which is an input element itself, using the input tag. Then I get I create a variable called username, and I set it equal to input element dot value, like whatever that value is, which is whatever the user has typed. Then I create another message, another variable, and then I use that. I then get a reference to my output element, and finally I use that variable that I created, and I output it as the inner text of my element. So I'm going kind of fast, but maybe I should actually double click this. Output element dot inner text is setting the text like that's inside of the element to whatever you give it. So putting all of that together, let me actually just refresh and try this out. So I'm going to enter my name, and I can type, whatever I want. I'm going to type Kevin here, and then I'm going to click here. And this, when I click this button, this is what runs my say hello function. So when I run my say hello function, and I know that it does that because in index.html, I have this onClick attribute. When I click it, it runs this say hello function, and it first gets a reference to my input element, which is this element right here. It then gets the value from that element, which is whatever I typed. It stores that value in a variable called username. It then creates a new variable called my message by appending hello to whatever my username was. Then it logs it in the console. That's fine. Then the code gets a reference to the output element, which is this element. And then finally, it sets the inner text of the output element to that variable that I created. So finally, I want to click say hello, and yay, I have hello Kevin in my page and hello Kevin in my console here as well. So from here, there's many things you can do. This opens up like, I don't know, Pandora's box, or box of opportunity, depending on how you look at it, to like making your page interactive. And from here, it's like just a matter of knowing what you can do. So I'll say that the like technical, like computer sciencey term for what we are doing here is called DOM manipulation, which sounds a little funny maybe, but in web development, the DOM is a specific thing. It's the document object model, I think. Let me double check. Document object model. And that is the concept that you can write HTML, and then you can write JavaScript that like messes with that HTML. So you can get references to your HTML tags. You can like change the content of your HTML. You can get the values that the user has typed. You can do things like change the styling from your JavaScript. And so your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript are now this sort of like trifecta of tools that you can use to make your page interactive and beautiful and creative and all the things. So maybe I won't spend a ton of time on all of them, but maybe just to demonstrate that, like, the style, like how they all interact. So what I'll do is, let's think about this. So I have my output right in my page, and it starts out as just saying loading. So there's a few ways I can approach this. Like, what if I don't want it to display by default? Well, the easiest way with what I have, with what we've done so far, is to just not have any content in it at all. So if I just modify my H1 to not have any content, then that's what it'll show by default. And if I refresh, now I no longer see my H1 because there is an H1 in here, which I can actually confirm by inspecting the element. And yep, there it is, H1 output. It just doesn't have any content, so it's not really visible. But if I click here, then I do see it. But maybe that's not super duper interesting. Maybe what I want to do is, I don't know, after I click say hello, maybe I want to hide that button. That'll be fun. So that I can only click it one time and it goes away after that. It's kind of arbitrary, but I want to show the idea that you can sort of mix and match HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it all kind of works. So first, what I want to do is add an ID attribute to my button. So ID equals, and I don't know, I'm just going to call it button. So I have my ID, and it is button, and I could style this in my CSS, and maybe I will just for funsies. So I'll have an ID selector of button, and I'll make this, I don't know, like font size 24 pixels. Maybe I'll make it kind of bigger so that it's a little more interesting. And there it is, quite a bit bigger, and I click say hello, and it still works. But what I want to do is modify the visibility of that element, like after I click it. So if I go to script.js, sort of at the bottom of my code, I will say, first get a reference to that button. So I'll say let button element equals document.get element by ID button. And now I want to set, instead of setting like the inner text of my button, like I could do something like button element dot inner text equals empty. You might expect that to work. And maybe it will. I actually don't know. Let's find out. Not really, because I still have a button. It just doesn't have any text in it. So that didn't really work. So it's not really what I want to do. Instead, what I can do is modify the style of my element. So if I look at how to do that, I can say button element dot style and then the name of a property. So maybe I'll say like dot color equals red just to test it out. So I am using my reference to my button element, and then I'm setting its dot style dot color, which is kind of a long-winded say to set the color of my style of my button to red. And this is going to be pretty much exactly the same thing as if I had put it in my CSS, but it's not going to trigger until I get to this line of code. So if I go over here and refresh, and then I click say hello, now my button turns red. And, that is connecting all of the dots, but it's not exactly what I set out to do. So what I set out to do was make it invisible. So again, like connecting all of these dots, like if I didn't know how to do that, I could go to like JavaScript, I don't know, like hide element maybe. And, I can click any of these links and I've got some options, and here like blah, blah, blah dot style dot display equals none. That looks promising. And there's other ways to do it, but you can click through and find the like examples of code that do the thing that you want to do and bring them into your project. So maybe I'll just try that one, like style.display equals none. There are other ways to do it, but let's just try this. Refresh. Here is my name. I am still Kevin, and say hello. And now it says hello, Kevin, and my button is gone. And, from here, I might change it to, maybe I want to also hide this p tag or change its text. Maybe I want to change this input element so I can only type it once. There's many things I could do, but the idea will be the same. I am writing HTML that contains elements. Those elements have usually IDs. You can also get references to elements by like class or tag name, but for now, I think sticking with IDs is probably smart. So my HTML elements have IDs, and then my JavaScript uses those IDs with the document.getElementById function. It passes those IDs in as parameters or arguments. I store the reference to that element in a variable, and then I can mess with it, which is what DOM manipulation is all about, or document object model manipulation is manipulating your HTML from your JavaScript. And this is how you make interactive web pages. And I won't go over it again, but what I'm doing is using the references to my HTML elements to do things like set its inner text, set its style. I can do things like delete it from the page entirely. I can also like create new elements and build my page out dynamically that way. And for all of that, like go to the tutorials and read through how to do that. But again, the idea is the same. You are writing JavaScript that messes with your HTML. All right, so we are finally at the end of these series of videos. So you now know how to make a dynamic web page using a mix of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The last thing I'll say is you are sort of at an inflection point where HTML and CSS are kind of forgiving. If you like miss a closing tag, it's fine. The browser will do something. If you like have, I don't know, some extra classes or something in your CSS, it'll still mostly work. It'll still be fine. Whereas if you make like small mistakes in your JavaScript will fail. And so let's see. So let's say I have this name input, and this is going to be a little contrived because, I'm doing it ahead of time, but let's say I forgot that I had a dash in there. That's an easy mistake to make. And I promise that like coding requires making mistakes. So this will happen to you. So let's just refresh and see what happens. So if I refresh and I enter my name, maybe I'll change my name back to Oscar the Grouch, and I click say hello. What happened? What the heck? Nothing happened. And this will happen, I promise. And it does not mean that you're like making horrible mistakes. It means that you're coding, because this is a very normal part of coding. And what you should do when you encounter this, the first thing you should do, the first place you should look is your JavaScript console. It's super important. So I actually usually just always have mine open. So that's what I would recommend. So if I go to more tools and developer tools, this is where my error message will be. So I'm going to open up this console tab over here, console, and here it is. Uncaught type error, input element is null, and it gives me more information about that error. So it's on line 5 of my script.js file. So, okay, let's go there. Line 5 of my script.js file. And it's saying that this is, what did it say? This element is null, which means like nothing. It means this variable does not have a value. But wait a second, yes, it does. I just created it here. So this is a hint that you need to look at this line of code and like really confirm that it's what you intended. And in this case, it's like, okay, let me double check that this ID is what I used in my HTML. And oh, wait, no, it's not. I used a dash in my HTML, so I need to use a dash in my JavaScript. Or I could get rid of my dash in my HTML so that this match. As long as they match, it's fine. So let me add a dash, and now my error message will go away when I click say hello, and it'll work again. So you will start encountering a lot of error messages, and that's normal, totally normal part of coding. My best advice is to look in your JavaScript console. And the other thing I'll say is like try to code like one little thing at a time. Like get like one button working or one input element working, whatever, depending on what you're doing. Like don't try to code like 100 lines of JavaScript that does everything and then run it, because you will have 100 error messages, and they'll be impossible to fix. So instead, like write like 3 lines of code, test those out. Use console.log, use these debugging tools. All right, that's enough of me talking. I've been talking my time, like 2 hours. Hopefully it wasn't as bad for you as it was for me, but you are now like pretty much, you have all of the fundamentals of web development. You've got HTML, you've got CSS, you've got JavaScript, and you know how to make your page like interactive and dynamic using DOM manipulation. From here, it's building on that. It's adding more and more tools to that foundation, but this is the foundation. So welcome to it. You are officially a web developer. All right, well, that's enough of me talking. I will see you in the next one where we'll like actually use this to build on a project. But for now, as always, of course, happy coding.